Nancy worked at one of the high-end hair salons in the city. She was one of the best hairstylists there. She aspired to eventually transition into the movie industry. She grew up with her sister Vanessa, who worked as a financial analyst in a bank. Vanessa didn't really like the fact that Nancy worked at a hair salon. Are you going to do someone else's hair for the rest of your life? Don't you want to try something else? But Nancy loved her job. She was a bright student at school, and despite expectations from people that surrounded her, she chose to pursue the profession of a hairstylist. To her sister's remarks, she would always say, "I love making people look pretty and fall in love with themselves again." She had worked at the salon for 4.5 years. The management loved her. She would always leave clients satisfied with the result. "Nancy, you have to go to school and get a decent degree," Vanessa often lamented. "Sister, you know that a degree is not the only option in life. I enjoy my work," Nancy replied. "The more you stay there, the harder it'll get for you to actually become someone in life," her sister said. "Well, let's see where this takes me," Nancy answered indifferently. She had gone to school once. It was at the beginning of her career as a hairstylist. She couldn't handle the constant mockery from her peers when they discovered she came from the beauty industry. She realized she was way better off doing what she loved. Nancy was a fast learner though. She still had so much to discover. It was the prom day at the local school, and Nancy was expecting a lot of clients that day. But she woke up late because her alarm didn't go off for some reason. She quickly got dressed and hurried to work. Nancy knew she wasn't going to have a lot of time for lunch, so decided to grab a sandwich from the diner nearby. As she came out with a paper bag that had a warm sandwich that she would eat on the way to work, she spotted a homeless man sitting on the ground nearby. She felt a pang of sadness in her heart as she realized that this man had likely been living on the streets for a long time. His hair was unkempt and his face was dirty, but his eyes were kind and gentle. As she approached him, she noticed that he was shivering in the cold and his clothes were tattered and worn. "Excuse me, sir? I'm sorry to bother you. Would you like a sandwich?" Without getting a response, she reached into her paper bag and pulled out the sandwich. She handed it to the man and watched as his eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you so much," the man said, and began to eat the food hungrily, as if it had been days since he had last eaten. Nancy realized she was getting really late and thought she would survive somehow without food until the afternoon, so she didn't go back. She hurried to her car, got in, and started to drive. Before she got on the highway, she looked at the homeless man and saw how 2 teenage boys were pulling his long overgrown hair and laughing. She couldn't bear to see the man being bullied like that, and her heart ached for him. She got angry and swung her car back to the parking lot. She knew what it was like to be teased and picked on, and it broke her heart to see someone else being treated like that. Without hesitating, she walked over to the boys and sternly told them to stop. "What do you guys think you're doing, huh? What did he do to you? Get out of here, you pricks. Go get lost." The boys looked at her skeptically at first, but when they saw she was furious, they stopped and apologized. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you again. Look, I work not far from here. I'm a hairstylist. Can I give you a haircut?" The poor man looked up at Nancy. He was hesitant about what to say. "I'd love a haircut, but I'm dirty and... look at me." "Don't worry about that. That's not a big deal." Nancy helped the man get up and led him to the car. As they came into the hair salon, everyone stared at Nancy and the man. "Nancy? Who is that?" Tina asked. "This is Mr. Coleman. We're getting him a nice haircut today," Nancy replied. "Are you out of your mind, Nancy? You've got 5 girls waiting for you. They've got their prom." Tina was outraged. "It's all right. We can take care of everybody. Actually, the new girl can help me with them. In fact, why don't you start working on them right now?" Nancy told the new girl who was recently hired. At that point, Chelsea walked into the hall. She was in charge of the place temporarily. The manager, Olivia, left for the fashion show and had asked Chelsea to make sure the salon operated smoothly. "Sir, why don't you go to the hair for homeless? They're actually a few blocks from here. This place is not for someone like you. And Nancy, before you bring him over here, why don't you ask me first?" "Oh wow, Chelsea. Are you really saying this in front of this man? I'm sorry, I brought him here, okay? I'll give him a haircut and he will leave." Nancy was upset. "Who's going to pay?" Chelsea asked. "What do you mean? I'll do it for free," Nancy replied. "Yeah, but you still need to pay though. It's not your hair salon and you can't do whatever you want here," Chelsea said. "Sure, I will pay. Don't worry, Chelsea." Nancy was getting angry now. gosh, he stinks. Can someone open the window? Chelsea quickly walked away, pinching her nose. That's it. I can't take it anymore. Chelsea, get over here. Nancy was furious. She walked over to Chelsea and stood right in front of her face and screamed. You have no right to speak like that. I'm gonna pay for him. He'll get his haircut and leave. Now go and apologize. You brought that bum. I'm not gonna apologize for anything. Am I wrong, girls? This guy stinks and look at his clothes. He probably hasn't showered for years. This place is a high-class hair salon. We've got wealthy clients and you can't just bring in bums from the streets. Nancy was shocked. She realized there's not much she could do to convince them to listen to themselves. She decided to just quietly do her job without paying attention to what they were saying. When she turned around, Mr. Coleman was gone. She ran out and saw him walking away. She caught up with him and said, Mr. Coleman, come back. Let's go back inside. Sweetheart, I'm so grateful for what you've done. I don't need a haircut. I don't want to cause you any trouble, he replied. Mr. Coleman, you're going to cause me trouble if you don't come back. Don't listen to those girls. They're just different. Nancy convinced him to come back and proceeded to cut his long hair. The only person who didn't say anything but just smiled was an old lady, Mrs. Jones. She was a janitor in the salon. She smiled at Nancy and just nodded to her. As she passed by her, she quietly whispered, There sure will be an action when Olivia returns, but you did the right thing, Mrs. Jones assured Nancy. In about an hour, Nancy was done. As he looked in the mirror, Mr. Coleman couldn't believe his eyes. The old man staring back at him had been transformed into a handsome, distinguished gentleman. His hair, which had been unruly and unkempt before, was now styled into a sleek, modern cut that suited his features perfectly. Nancy didn't regret a single bit that she helped the poor man. In fact, when they were done, she took him to the nearby shop and bought him some new clothes. As Mr. Coleman stepped out into the street, he felt like a new man. He walked down the street with his head held high, feeling confident and proud. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was truly living again. He had forgotten how good it felt to take pride in his appearance and to feel good about himself. Nancy was really proud of her work. After all, she truly enjoyed making people happy and seeing them smile again. As they walked back to the salon, Mr. Coleman shared the story of how he ended up in the street. He became homeless a few years ago when his marriage broke up. He had taken on a big mortgage and the interest rate went up. He became overstretched when his marriage ended. He had lost an income, then his job at a boatyard. He was falling further and further behind with his debt repayments. He wasn't aware of his mental meltdown. He began drinking too much and soon got hooked. When his home was repossessed, he was depressed and it drained all his energy. His friends let him stay at their home for a while, but he didn't want to be a burden and soon moved out. Since then, he had been living on the streets. He thanked Nancy for her kindness. She gave him some cash she had in her wallet and her card. She didn't promise much, but asked him to give him a call if he needed to talk. That day, Nancy came home exhausted from doing hairs for all the prom girls. In the morning, a phone call woke her up. It was Mrs. Jones calling. She told Nancy that when Olivia came back from the fashion show, Chelsea told her everything about last night, and Olivia wasn't happy. For the first time in 5 years, Nancy didn't feel like going to work. But she decided to go and explain everything to Olivia. I told her that bum is going to ruin our reputation as one of the best hair salons in the city, but she wouldn't listen, Chelsea was telling Olivia in the office. This really hurts our reputation and I think you should fire her. Olivia came out into the main hall. Her face twisted into a scowl as she looked at Nancy. Her eyes blazed with anger and frustration, and her tone was harsh and accusatory. Who is that man? She demanded. Do you know him? Why did you bring him here? Olivia, I'm really sorry. I just felt sad for the man and this is all I could do to him. I'm sorry I used your hair salon for that, Nancy said. This is a business place, not a charity organization. I'm gonna have to fire you. I'm gonna have to withhold your paycheck for the week too. It'll go towards covering the expenses for the cleaning. What cleaning? Nancy was confused. She was shaking. The conversation with Olivia left her speechless. She was quietly crying and collecting her things. She called her sister and told her she was fired. I told you, Nancy, but you never listened to me. Then she told her why she was fired and shared Mr. Coleman's story with her. They're just so heartless and think about money all the time. They just don't know the meaning of being kind sometimes. I mean, it happened just once. I thought they would understand, Nancy said to her sister through her tears.